All right. Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good
Welcome
morning.
to Thursday Bible study after the great Easter celebration. We're still in the Easter season,
We're
so
still, here I say, we got another 50 days, 40 days.
got a good number of days to continue to celebrate the resurrection of our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Let me put our Gospel of John on the screen. Do you remember where we were last? I had notes that said you guys got as far as that we would be starting at verse 20.
28.
28, yeah, 28. We didn't get to the trial yet.
All right. Well, before we actually jump into the text, was anybody listening this year? Did you hear anything different when you were listening? Now that you're experts on the Gospel of John?
Oh, I know we had John. Yeah.
You heard the Gospel of John on
Yeah.
Thursday, the washing of the feet. You heard the Passion narrative according to John on Friday, and you heard the Easter story according to John on Sunday.
Okay.
Didn't make any impression, huh? All right, well, let's keep going, see if it makes an impression. Do we have any questions before we get started?
Yes, Father. When I came in, you all were discussing about Mary, the husband of Cleopas. Where was this at in John? Do you?
At the foot of the cross. So if you really just want to quickly jump.
Okay, don't jump. I think I can do that.
Here we go. Stand by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I know what I was thinking. There's so many Marys. I wonder how they got them all straight.
Right. Well, often that's how they see they have to give more to identify. So Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. That's Mary Magdalene.
Right. That was a common name back then.
So if this Clopas is the Cleopas of in St. Luke's gospel, then this is the Cleopas who's walking to Emmaus, and if there's somebody else there and his wife was at the cross, there's a good chance his wife was with him.
Same person, Cleopas and Clopas.
That's if they are the same person. We don't know for sure.
Okay.
But
No,
They had to put an E in there and confuse us.
there are manuscripts of the Gospel of John that do have Cleopas.
Cleopas instead of Clopas. Okay. Thank you.
But, we don't, they said we'll never fully understand exactly what happened, but you just kind of play with things and put them together. How would that change your understanding of what happened? But all right, well, let's pick up with the trial before Pilate. Who would like to start reading at verse 28?
I'll read. The trial before Pilate. Then they brought Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium. It was morning, and they themselves did not enter the praetorium in order not to be defiled, so that they could eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and said, "What charge you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." At this, Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews answered him, "We do not have the right to execute anyone," in order that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, that he said, indicating the kind of death he would die. So Pilate went back into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, Do you say this on your own, or have others told you about me? Pilate answered, I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom did belong to this world, my attendants would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not here. So Pilate said to him, then you are a king. Jesus said, you say I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth?
Okay,
When he had said this, he
Michael,
again went out to the Jews and said to them,
let's,
I find no guilt in him, but
Michael,
you have a, yes,
let's stop at what is, okay,
He's running along.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't,
okay, yeah, I just don't want to go too far and we'll miss what this, because it actually does kind of take place in scenes as well.
oh,
So,
okay.
all right, so let's look at the trial before Pilate, the portion that Michael just read, and we'll do as we always do. What are your first impressions?
Well, I was thinking, why couldn't they go into the Praetorium?
Was it because it was Passover?
Okay,
Why would they be
Because they were-
defiled if they were going into that one? I'm trying to figure that out.
They
Okay.
didn't want, I don't think they wanted to contract any kind of impurities.
What is the Praetorium?
I guess where they're
That's-
tried, where they go
It's-
before Pilate to be tried.
I thought the Praetorium was like a place where they were like a holy place reserved for prayer, particularly during, and that's why they didn't want to bring him there, I guess, to defile it, what they were doing, like they considered him a criminal.
But I'm looking at, they said they didn't want to be defiled. So that's why they didn't enter the Praetorium. So what kind of place was the Praetorium that would make them defiled? So,
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
what I
was that
was
like a
wondering.
court, or, I mean, that's what I'm trying to understand. Why would they be defiled if they went in there?
I think
I
it
think
belongs-
because, well, it was Pilate's house. It was, well, just like someone else said, it was the province where he held his court. But if they even touch anything, first of all, is Pilate a Gentile? I'm asking the question, and then I can finish my thought is that right?
Pilate was Roman, yes. So that's maybe that could have been the reason why they didn't want to go into
Okay.
his house.
Right. So
Right.
that's what I'm thinking. So since they were Gentiles, if the Jews even touched the Gentiles, then they were considered to be impure. And then they wouldn't have been able to practice whatever religious thing that they did. They wouldn't have been able to practice it. I can't think of what that is
Yeah,
right now.
because I thought it was the day before the feast, the day before Passover.
Mm.
And they would not have been able to celebrate Passover.
Right.
I'm
'Cause
looking
Right.
at it as being the tent of a Roman general. So
Mhm.
it has some sort of, they're not Roman, are they? They're Hebrew,
right.
so they can't go in there. They're
Yeah.
saying here the title derived from the title praetor, which identified a Roman magistrate.
It shows the hypocrisy. Here they are doing something very evil and foul, but yet they can't go into a Roman general's house,
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
that's why they're taking him to Pilate, because they knew that they couldn't crucify him, that it was against their law. So they're handing him over to someone else.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then
To
after
do
they
their
handed them
dirty work.
over, after they turned them over to Pilate, then they twisted the charge.
Mhm.
It's just amazing to me.
The evil that men do.
Yes. And he's saying, my kingdom does not belong to the world, because these men don't believe in the truth that he's there to tell them. And these men should have been protecting him, not trying to kill him.
It reminded me of the two guys, the two Justins, that were expelled in the house. And they looked at them as political rebels, so to speak, when actually they were out there trying to fight for their constituents. So they charged them, well, they had no business expelling them at all, actually, but it was similar to that, the way I looked at it.
So I'm looking at 31 at the point, I think somebody asked a question about why didn't they kill him? And so where it says, when Pilate asked them, let's see, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. The Jews answered, we do not have I'm in verse 31.
Right,
We do not have the right to execute anyone,
right.
in order that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, that he said, indicating the kind of death he would die. Is that a continuation of the Jews speaking, or is that John adding in a narrative to that?
Jews, well, if the Jews
Answered him, yeah.
Right, because first they're saying we do not have the right to execute anyone. And I mean, we have that play between them. It's like Pilate's trying to give it back to them, and they're saying, no, you do it, because we don't have the right to execute anyone. But then it says, in order that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, that he said, indicating the kind of death he would die.
Well, that's the narrative.
That's not
It's like a narrative that someone,
That,
like you be narrating, just to
okay,
clarify
Right.
what was being done and said.
The parentheses ends just before 32.
That's what that is.
But I got a question about that, because they say they don't have the right to execute anyone, but there were several times through the New Testament where they were stoning people.
And,
And they were,
you said that right, Joy, right?
Jennifer.
Jennifer.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. They were, there were several times they stoned people, and then they were like, was it right before Palm Sunday that he had to sneak out because they were going to kill him? So
Right.
lying, basically,
They
because
really-
Yeah, I think it was okay for them to stone people, but definitely not to crucify anyone.
Right. They wanted to make sure he died. So
Yeah.
crucify him, hand him over to the Pilate, but it also sends a larger message to anyone else who wants to rise up and take over their position, per se.
isn't killing? I mean, no matter how you did it, they still killed
that's
somebody.
true.
Okay,
Yeah.
wait a minute before you step in. I have another
Yeah,
question. I want
there's
to-
a lot of details going on here, so we.
The end. He says in 36,
Mhm.
what is that? He says, my kingdom does not belong. What gets me? And he said, okay, this is 37. It says, you says I'm a king. Everyone who belongs to the truth, listen to my voice.
Mhm.
And then Paula says, what is the truth? So for this I was born gave me pause. Because here we go again. He wasn't born to die. He was born to come in the world to testify to the truth. That means to tell us about salvation. Am I reading that right?
I think that's a fair way of reading it, but I think, yes, as you say, remember, John's gospel is God sent his son into the world so that we may not perish, but live, right?
Right, they have eternal life.
And I was born, I came into the world to testify to the truth. So again, another instance where John is not saying Jesus came into the world to die.
Right.
All right, let's go back because there are some basic facts so that you have to be able to know to piece this all together. So let's do some of that. So the Praetorium, the Praetorium was like the courtyard where Pilate either lived or ruled. So it's Gentile territory in essence. And coming into it would defile them, not necessarily completely, but defile them at least that would interrupt their ability to eat the Passover. Okay, so when Jews were defiled, defilement really only meant what rituals could they participate in, having then had this encounter that defiled them. So, those of us who are, old Catholic know, right? You're not supposed to receive communion if you're aware of mortal sin, right? So mortal sin, in essence, defiles us. And as a result, we're not supposed to participate in one of our rituals because we're supposed to be, ritually worthy to participate in it. So that's sort of how defilement works. So Passover is a particularly high level of sort of holiness, cleanliness that is required. Does anybody ever, do you know any Jewish people? Have you ever asked them if they're observant, what they have to do to prepare for Passover?
No, I never asked a Jewish person.
Okay. So
well, I know they have to throw away a lot of their foods and
right,
clean out everything, the shelves.
exactly. So there's a level of kosherness, in essence, if that's a word, that is much higher for Passover than anything else. So they actually have an entirely separate set of dishes and silverware for Passover.
For Passover.
Yes.
They, as Regina said, they have to completely clean the house and make sure there isn't a crumb of bread in the house.
Nothing with leaven.
Nothing with leaven in it.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever get invited to a person's house for Passover, never bring them food or drink. Bring them flowers, because the chances are, if they're observant, they cannot even allow the food or drink that you're bringing them into their homes. Okay, so it's a much stricter level of observance, and it's only for the 8 days of Passover. So if you ever look at products, sometimes it'll just say kosher, right? And sometimes it'll say kosher for Passover. Okay, and so during Passover, they can eat that food because it's kosher for Passover, but they can't eat anything, even if it's kosher. It has to be kosher for Passover. All right, so that's the first thing, is that it's not clear that at other times of the year they couldn't enter the praetorium. It's just that because it's Passover and there's a much higher level of, holiness and cleanliness that they have to observe. So they don't go into the praetorium in order to, not to defile themselves. Now, here's something, again, remember I was talking, we tend to see things the way we want and we don't put it together, so that they could eat the Passover. Didn't they just eat the Passover? Wasn't the Passover Thursday night?
That's a good question.
Sure is.
Yeah, we passed that part. So this is out of order somehow.
No, it's not. It's just, again, we don't pay attention to the facts. In John's gospel, the Passover begins on Friday night, not on Thursday night. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Passover began on Thursday night. And as a result, the Last Supper for the first three Gospels is a Passover meal. It is not a Passover meal in John's Gospel, because in John's Gospel, the Passover doesn't begin until Friday night. Okay, so there is a discrepancy between
Yes,
the two the two versions of the Gospels as to whether the Last Supper actually was a Passover meal. Who's right? Is it Matthew, Mark, and Luke who are right that Passover began on Thursday night? Or is it John who's right that the Passover began on Friday night?
well, suppose it changed and John was the left and right. Wouldn't that, maybe it was Thursday and then moved to Friday. I don't know. I'm just,
Passover is like Easter. It's a moving, feast. It's not always April 10th.
right.
And so Passover is that way as well. But again, it's really what stories were passed down to them. John is writing a good 60 years later. So who even remembers what day Passover was 60 years ago? So it's really what's the tradition that was passed on to him. Or was it Thursday, but for certain reasons, he decides the way he wants to tell his story, it works better if it's Friday night. We're going to come back to that, okay? But again, this is one of those things that we just gloss over because in our mind, we know the story. So we know that the Last Supper was a Passover meal, but that's only because that's what Matthew, Mark, and Luke say it is. In John's gospel, it is not a Passover meal. They haven't yet eaten the Passover. Okay. So, and you'll see in a minute where we're going with that. Well, I don't know.
So you're saying that wait a minute. In John's gospel, the Last Supper then is before the Passover.
Yes. It's not a Passover meal. In John's gospel, we'll see the Passover begins at sunset on Good Friday. And we'll see that, okay? But again, as I say, we often just make all of these gospels say the same thing in the way the story is in our head, but we've got to allow the gospel to speak for itself. So that's part of the dynamic that's going on here, that the Passover hasn't yet started. And so they need to keep themselves pure so that they can participate in the Passover. Okay, so let's move on. What charge do you bring against this man? If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you. Well, then take him yourself and judge him according to your law. And the Jews answered, we do not have a right to execute anyone. Okay. What's going on here? Whose law is which? Whose law?
Are they referring to
English law.
maybe they thinking about the Roman law? They're not authorized because they're under Roman occupation or authority.
Okay, yes. So there are two different laws at work here, and it has to do with how Rome conquered. Rome did not conquer in the same way the Greeks conquered. When Alexander the Great came and conquered Mediterranean, he forced everybody to in essence, become Greek and follow Greek law. And he basically obliterated a lot of the cultures by what we call Hellenizing them, right? That's how you make somebody Greek. The Romans had a very different practice. The Romans, to some extent, like colonized you. They allowed groups to retain their own laws and culture to a certain extent. And then so that their law, Roman law, would govern to the extent that Rome wanted its law to govern. And that was basically, how do they preserve Roman rule and order? So Rome allowed the Jews to keep their own law, except they did not permit any culture, not just the Jews, they did not permit anybody to execute anyone without Rome deciding to execute them. Okay, so the Jewish law did have provisions for stoning people, but once Rome occupied Israel, Israel was no longer free to, Israelites were no longer free to stone people as part of punishment of their law. Okay, so when you say, actually, a few people said, oh, there are people who are stoned in the New Testament, I would challenge you, go back and read the New Testament. There is no case of anybody being stoned in the New Testament.
Well, I have a question, and I'm sure, I mean, there was an incident when there was someone the woman was going to be stoned for adultery.
Yep.
And then Jesus, said, they didn't want to, without sin, cast her from stone.
Right. So what did they do? They find the woman caught in adultery, and they bring her to Jesus and said, under our law, Moses said she's to be stoned to death. What do you say? And of course, they're saying it to trap him, to see what he's going to say. But there's no indication that they were about ready to stone her. They bring her to him and they want to trap him. And Jesus says, well, then, whoever's got whoever without sin, you can cast first stone. Now, we've seen it when we see in the movie. What do we see? They're all holding stones, right?
Right.
Start dropping their stones, and they walk away. Go back and read the story. There's nothing that says that these people have stones in their hand.
Right.
Okay.
So when you said they were trapping him, I guess if he said, yes, she should have been stoned, then he would have been going against Romans rule.
Yeah, well, that would have been right. If he says, let's pick up the stones and start stoning her, then he would be breaking Roman law, and they could accuse him of a crime under Roman law.
Okay.
What about when Stephen was stoned?
That was a crime. That they committed a crime. They killed him. And just when you said when they picked up stones to kill Jesus, right? And he says, for which one of my good deeds are you stoning me? That would have been against Jewish law. That they would have then been arrested. Had they stoned him and killed him, they would have been arrested and charged with crimes under Roman law. And so the stoning of Stephen is a crime. It's a murder. It's not an execution. It's a murder. Okay, so those are just some things you have to realize. So if they want Jesus dead, they can either murder him, right? Or they can accuse him of committing a crime against Rome and have Rome execute him.
Father Rich, you faded out a little. Can you repeat the first part of that, please? You said if they wanted Jesus dead, and then I lost you.
Okay, if they want Jesus dead, they only really have two choices. They can either murder him, kill him themselves, and under Roman law, that would be a murder. Or they can accuse him of a Roman, capital offense and have Rome execute him.
Okay.
Okay, so now I understand if they did it, if they murdered him, then they would subject themselves to some kind of punishment from the Romans, because that was against the Roman law. They couldn't kill anybody without their permission.
Right.
But if they give them to the Romans, they can get the job done, and their hands will be clean.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why they twisted the charge.
And right, because if the charge was blasphemy, Pilate doesn't care about blasphemy. That's your problem. You guys figure that out, right? So they have to now change the crime, because that's what they accuse him of, is blasphemy, when they were before Annas. But Pilate doesn't care if he's a blasphemer. Why does Pilate care? But if he's claiming to be king, why does Pilate care?
Because then he would be greater than him, I guess.
No,
Well,
Caesar is the king.
He
king.
will be greater than Caesar. I meant
Well, it's not
Caesar.
that he's greater, but he's challenging who the king is,
Right.
saying,
Yeah.
I'm king. There can only be one king. So if he claims to be king, then either either Caesar's king or he's king. Okay.
Yeah.
And he's not the real king of the Jews, because Herod is the real king of the Jews. So you have to realize it gets very complicated in terms of what it is. So Herod is technically the king of the Jews, but he has no power as king because the Romans are in control. So Herod is just a puppet
King.
of Caesar. So, you know, Caesar, the Romans don't regard Herod as the king like Caesar is. In fact, I don't know if you realize Caesar is a title, right? It's not a name. It's in actually in Latin, it's Kaiser. I mean, that's really how they referred to him. He was Kaiser, not Caesar. And who called themselves Kaiser?
Kaiser permanent.
Hitler.
Well, Hitler didn't, but the Germans, the German rulers called themselves Kaiser.
Kaiser, yeah.
That's how you get it. It's a derivative of Caesar. So anyway, so kind of they now have to accuse Jesus of a Roman crime in order to get Pilate to kill him. Okay. And so when he asks Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" When you listen to the response, Pilate is basically saying, "Are you challenging Herod as the king?" He doesn't see it yet as challenging Caesar, because when Jesus says, "Do you say this on your own or have others told you about it?" Pilate says, "Well, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation has handed you over to me. Your people are the ones who are concerned that you're a king. I'm not concerned that you're a king. I know Caesar is king, and so in Pilate's mind, that's the first level of accusation. They're claiming that he's king of the Jews, and Pilate could care less who the king of the Jews is. He'll only care if you say he is king of the emperor of the Mediterranean. Then he becomes a threat to Caesar. Are you following me?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, I am following you.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
and it's hard because if you don't know all the rules and the culture and everything, so I'm sure many of you, when Pilate responds to Jesus, "I'm not a Jew, am I?" You're scratching your head and saying, what the hell is he saying? I'm not a Jew. Who cares? Well, what he's saying is, I'm not one of your people who is concerned about whether this guy is your king. He ain't my king. I know that. I know my king is Caesar. But they're accusing him of being, well, Pilate's interpreting them as saying that he's king of the Jews. And when we go further, you're going to see that they switch it and say, we're not accusing him of being king of the Jews. We're challenging him as being a rival to Caesar. We're not there yet. Okay. You have to let the drama play itself out. John is a master at drama. So he takes it a little bit at a time. The other guys tell you too much too soon. But John draws it out. So when Jesus says, "My kingdom does not belong to this world," and then Pilate says, "So you are a king?" And he says, "Well, you say I'm a king, but I came to testify to the truth." And Pilate responds, "What is truth?" Can you imagine in your mind what is Pilate saying here? Think of Pilate as Donald Trump.
trying to prove that he does not know Jesus, that Jesus is supposed to be the truth.
He'll
Well,
never know the truth.
the truth is what Pilate says it is. Just like the truth is what Donald Trump says it is, whether it's true or not. And then he's just plain action. Who knows? What is the truth?
Yeah.
And
Truth
why,
is
and
what
what
he
does
Presented,
I think
he's
truth is
presented-
what he says is truth.
okay, and
Yeah.
why can truth be what Pilate says it is?
because he has a mental illness.
No.
Because he has the authority.
Because he
He's
has
got the power.
Power.
Yes, that's
He
what
has the power.
And
He
that's
has
gonna,
the political power to do so.
well, that's gonna be the next exchange between Jesus and Pilate. We're not there yet, but you know, if you remember my homily on Good Friday, this is a drama about what is truth and what is power. Okay, so the first issue is the true king is the king who testifies to the truth. And anyone who belongs to the truth listens to the true king. And Pilate just dismisses it. What the heck is truth? Truth is whatever I decide it is because I have the power to enforce it. And isn't that what Donald Trump thinks? Truth is what he says it is because he has the power to enforce it. All right. So far, so good.
Yes.
So remember that the first level of charges, he's a king. In Pilate's mind, he is thinking king of the Jews, not king of the world. And Jesus is saying, I am a king in essence, but my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is in the world of truth. And I came to testify to the truth, and anybody who belongs to the truth will listen to my voice. Okay. So Jesus is king. He's just not king the way we think of kings, and he's not the king the way they think of kings. All right, Michael, keep going.
Where do you want me to pick up? Which verse?
Right up when he had said this, after what is truth.
Okay. When he had said this, he again went out to the Jews and said to them, I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I release one prisoner to you at Passover. Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? They cried out, not this one, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a revolutionary.
Okay. I find no guilt in him. What's he saying?
Saying that he didn't, in his mind, he didn't do anything wrong or nothing against Rome. That would be
Right. Under Roman law, I find no guilt in him. Now, but you have a custom that I released one prisoner to you at Passover. What's he saying there?
He's putting it back on them, basically.
Well, it goes to what I was saying earlier. It's Rome's respect for the local culture as long as it isn't a problem for Rome. So I find no guilt in him under Roman law, but I know under your law and your culture and your custom, you usually ask me to release a prisoner at Passover. So I'm going to respect that. I don't have a problem with that. I'm going to give you something according to your law. So you want me to release this guy, or you want me to release, you want me to release this guy? And then they say, no, not him, but Barabbas. So you see, in this exchange, Pilate is showing that Rome has a respect for Jewish law and custom, but their law is supreme. And there are certain times when their law is going to trump, excuse my play on words, their law is going to overcome the Jewish law.
Yes. Basically, he didn't make the decision, they did.
Well, that's because that was the custom,
Yes.
and he's willing to respect that. He doesn't have any problem with that custom. So it's a Jewish custom, though. It's not a Roman custom. Okay, and then not this one, but Barabbas. We've talked, I think, a little bit in the other gospels. You know what Barabbas means?
What?
It means Barabbas is
Barabbas means son of the father,
son of the Father.
son of the father.
So Bar is Hebrew for son, and Abba is Hebrew or Aramaic. It is the same in both languages. Abba is for father. So Barabbas is literally means son of the Father. So we'll play with that a little bit.
My grandson to notice and wonder about things when he's reading, but I just wonder if they were ever sorry about Barabbas being released back into the community.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know about that, but I mean, in all four gospels, they seem to think it's important to tell you his name.
Yes, because
Mhm.
one, it's a play on words, sort of, because Jesus is the son of the true father, whereas Barabbas is the son of the father, which is man. So it's kind of a play on words, kind of.
Yeah. Or I would say it just to make it more of a play on words. Jesus is the son of the true
True
Father,
father, yes.
and Barabbas is the son of the Father in word alone,
Yes,
or in name alone, right? Because his name means Barabbas, but he ain't really the son of the Father.
right. So
Son of the Father.
answer, what is that, Garnetta, about people being sorry about it. I don't think they were sorry about that they, the ones who cried Barabbas, because it's sort of like how he was more popular at the time, and I can say it was a revolutionary. It's sort of like what we do in election time. We continue to vote for the names that we recognize, whether it's good for us or not. Most people go to the polls and vote for the person they heard about. Oh yeah, I heard about that one. But that person probably been there forever and hadn't done a darn thing for us, but we continue to vote for him. And I think that is the same thing about Barabbas. He was a revolutionary. So he was fighting for the cause of the people, and that's why he was arrested, probably because he was against Rome, speaking out against the Roman. And that's that's what they wanted to see in there, in the Messiah. They wanted to see in the Messiah that they wanted a king, that somebody was going to come in and help them wipe out the Jew at the
Roman.
yeah.
And compared to Jesus, Barabbas didn't
Wipe up.
pose a threat to them, more so like they saw Jesus.
Well, I don't think that. If you, okay, this is all the people.
You think they're? I didn't think they were a threat to the Jews. Just like Dee was saying, I think by him being a warrior, maybe he got caught fighting against the Romans, fighting against larger forces. So the Romans arrested him. Who arrested him? The Romans arrested him?
So if you remember what Father said earlier, that it's not all the Jews who turned Jesus in. It's the leadership that did this. So all of the Jews have no clue whether, about what, Jesus is. I mean, all of them don't. But the leadership does. And the leadership probably started this thing about letting Barabbas go. So that's all I'm gonna say on the subject.
Yeah,
I was saying, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Michael.
No, I was asking.
I was just gonna say that as far as the Jewish leadership, Jesus versus Barabbas, I think Jesus represented to the Jewish authority a threat to their authority. Barabbas didn't. Barabbas was somewhat of an advocate for Jewish, whatever you want to call it. So the Romans, Barabbas was a threat to Roman law, and Jesus was the threat to Jewish authority.
Oh, Michael.
So
that-
I'm saying,
yeah,
so
that's
they
nice.
released Barabbas. They said, give me Barabbas, because Barabbas didn't represent a threat to them like Jesus did.
The
Speaking
leadership.
of the Jewish authority.
Yeah, the
That's all
Jewish
I wanted to
authority.
say.
You said-
Yeah, I agree with that. That's what Dee was saying too, I think.
Right.
Yes, I mean, that's as, probably as good a way of looking at it as possible.
Right.
John doesn't really tell us why they asked for Barabbas. The other three gospel writers do tell us that it was the Jewish leaders who stirred the crowd up to ask for Barabbas, because they clearly have it in for Jesus. So they don't want Jesus released. And the first three gospels give you the impression that had the Jewish leaders not stirred up the crowd may have said, release Jesus. Because after all, we had just a few days before hailed him as king, when he came into Jerusalem. So the first three gospels make it very clear that it's the Jewish leaders who are stirring up the crowd to demand Barabbas. John doesn't really tell us why, but in the bigger picture, what Michael says is exactly right. Jesus is a threat to the Jewish leaders. Barabbas is, and Barabbas is a threat to Rome. So, so if you get rid of if you let Barabbas out, and you kill Jesus, then the Jewish leaders get what they want from it. Okay.
So now what was the point in modern time today? What would have been the point of stringing up Pence and killing him?
Well,
Because he didn't fit their narrative.
yeah, I mean, that's
Well, yeah, but I'm saying after they killed him, they still would have, someone else would have cropped up and followed the law.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that you can create a parallel as well, because Pence wasn't trying to, Pence was standing in their way of their coup. And so they had to get rid of him because he was in the way, but not because he was a threat in the same way that I guess, they're seeing Jesus and Barabbas. I'm not sure the parallel is quite analogous with Trump, but I mean with Pence. But again, it shows you what mobs can do, right? Mobs can demand the death of people.
Yeah.
But anyway, to finish this off, because then we'll call it a day. The irony in all four gospels is the people are given a choice between the son of the true father and the son of the father in name, and they pick the wrong one. Okay, so
And Barabbas was really a criminal. He was, I think in the other gospels, they point out that he was an actual criminal.
well, I mean, it says right here, he's a revolutionary. That was a criminal.
Yeah.
But in the larger story that the four gospels are telling, the reason they all tell you his name is Barabbas is they're creating this, irony that the people are given a choice, and this son of the father or that son of the father, and they pick the wrong one. And what's the message? You as the reader, you have a choice too. And are you going to pick the right one, or are you going to pick the wrong one?
I don't think either one of them were the criminals per se. is my thought. Even Barabbas, he was a revolutionary, and he was fighting against the injustice of the Roman, the Romans over them. And, like we do now, we had those groups, it still reminds me of the two men at the court. I mean, what state was that?
Tennessee.
Tennessee, right? The two guys in that one, but they weren't speaking the same language as the rest of the Republicans in that Senate. So they had to be ousted. And Barabbas is, to me, doing the same thing. Eventually, I think that the Romans, because of what he's doing, the Romans will get him again. Whereas Jesus, he has no guilt. I mean, what are they trying to kill him for?
All right,
And
I'll
that's
just
why
say
I asked
this,
the
just
question
to have a little-
about,
let me say this, just to have a little fun with you. You're okay with what, that the two the two representatives in Tennessee were speaking out because you agreed with what they were saying. I could turn around and say the revolutionaries of the insurrection on January 6th, they were the true patriots. They were truly trying to save our country. But the powers that be silenced them. Okay, so it's the whole thing is where you sit is where you stand.
You're absolutely right.
So,
right,
absolutely
but the insurrection is the difference between the insurrections and the two Justins is that the insurrectionists broke the law.
they broke the rules of the
Yeah,
house.
they broke the law too.
They broke the rules. The
Yeah.
No, that's the difference in breaking the rules and breaking the law.
No, they were still, they subject themselves to the rules of the house, and then they just subject themselves to the discipline for breaking the rules. The debate is not whether they broke the rules. The debate was whether the punishment
Hit the crime.
hit the crime.
Yes.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying, well,
Now they both violate there's really no difference between a rule and a law. I mean, it's authority. I mean, if you come into my church, I have certain rules and I may have power to discipline you, and you agree with that. And that's all they did is when you are sworn in to a legislative body, you're agreeing to abide by the rules of that legislative body. And if you break them, they have the authority to discipline you. But the debate was that in most cases, had this happened to two white guys and at two white Republicans, at most they would have like issued a warning. That would have been the discipline. Don't do this again. That breaks our rules. Don't do it again. But the fact that it was two black guys who did it, there was a white woman and she wasn't kicked out. There were three of them who did it.
Right.
All three of them broke the rules.
Right.
But the white woman held her job and the two black men were kicked out. And that's where the debate is that the
right, and there's a theory about that, because when when the first black guy was kicked out, the other black guy was there to vote for her, because when they look at the difference in the votes of kicking her out, it was only by one vote. So that's the theory, is that it was Pearson's vote who held her in there. But I wasn't really talking about, I guess what I'm thinking about the rules and law is that with the rules that they broke, they can't appeal to the courts. I guess I'm thinking differently about rules and law. I understand the purpose and the whole point of what they tried to do, how they were reinstated and all. But I guess to me, there was no way for them to go through a court system. Well, maybe there was, I don't know.
Yeah, there could have been. We're not really sure. That courts are very hesitant to get involved with.
Yeah.
But,
You mean way to appeal the decision?
Yeah, the way to appeal
the
the decisions.
fact that they could kind of work it out I mean, I'm sure the courts were happy with. But I think where the commonality of it all is we can get the law to do whatever we want the law.
Right.
If
Yes.
if we have the power, we can get the law to do what we want it to do. And the people who are messed up are the ones who don't have the power. And I think that's where both of these cases are really on the same page. That and we're going to get to that conversation next about power.
Can I add two things real quick? Go ahead, Father, and I'll wait.
I was just saying that the reason this is all messed up is because it really isn't about law or rules. It's about power.
Power.
Yes.
And
Political power.
and you know, and Jesus is going to try to set that straight in a few more verses. All right, go ahead.
So, I had two things. One about the root. Were you all aware that happened again? A lady in Arizona was expelled, a Republican, by a majority House Republican in Arizona for breaking the rules on the floor. She brought a witness in who reiterated the stealing of the 2020 election, but it was done on the floor. But her own party, who was in the majority, kicked her out. Well, they expelled her. So there's the one we had in Tennessee, but here's the flip of that in Arizona. I believe that happened last week, but nobody's really talking about that one yet. But I just thought that was interesting as well. And I'm sorry. The second thing was just to close out from the reading guide. I'm reading from the Bible here. When they were talking about what was going on with Jesus and Pilate, it says the violent cruelty and bitterness of this scene shows us what brute force and political power are like when those in power have no conscience of their responsibilities to God. Pilate is only interested in asserting Roman power over the conquered Jews, which you said, Father Rich. The death of an obscure Galilean is of no concern to him. When we meditate on this passage, we should recognize that we have a responsibility to protect such abuses of power in our own world. We cannot stand by and permit innocent people to be brutalized and even killed to support tyrannical power. And that's from the Catholic Reading Guide for this chapter.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Send it to Jim Jordan.
All right. Well, let's call it a day. We're going to stop the
Recording.
sharing. Stop the recording.